There are moments in life when a person stops reacting the way they used to. Not because they don't care anymore, but because caring has cost them too much. Emotional numbness is not coldness. It is the body's last attempt to protect itself. When someone becomes emotionally numb, they aren't shutting others out. They're trying to survive inside their own mind. It's the quietest people who often carry the loudest storms. The ones who don't show their feelings are usually the ones who once felt everything too deeply. And now, after years of hurt, disappointment, or emotional overload, their system simply switches off. Life becomes muted, not painful, not joyful, just flat, like the world has lost its color and they're watching it from behind glass. Today, we explore the dark psychology behind this emotional shutdown, why it happens, what it means, and how it shapes the minds of people who no longer feel the way they used to. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's a story that was never allowed to be told. Emotional numbness often begins in moments when the mind reaches its limit. A person doesn't simply wake up one day without emotions. It happens slowly, silently, and often without them realizing it. The human brain is built to protect us, even when we don't understand what it's doing. And when it senses that a person has been overwhelmed for too long, it steps in and flips a switch. Not a dramatic switch, but a quiet one that dims emotions instead of eliminating them. This happens after repeated emotional shocks, heartbreaks, betrayals, chronic stress, loneliness, trauma, or simply years of feeling invisible. When the emotional system is pushed beyond its capacity, it begins to shut down like an overloaded circuit. The brain is not trying to harm the person, it's trying to save them from feeling more than they can handle. The numb person may not notice the moment this change happens. At first, they might just feel tired, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Then they realize they're not reacting the way they used to. Things that once made them laugh don't feel funny anymore. Problems that used to hurt don't sting the same way. Even happy moments lose their shine. This is not peace, it is emotional fatigue. The brain is telling them, "You've felt enough pain. Let me protect you now." So it lowers the intensity of all feelings, good and bad. It is like turning down the volume of life itself. The numbness becomes a shield, but it is also a prison, because the person is not only protected from pain, they are also separated from joy. The brain, however, doesn't differentiate. It cannot turn off sadness without dimming happiness. It cannot block fear without blocking excitement. So the person lives in the middle, in a flat emotional landscape. They may describe it as emptiness, hollowness, or simply nothing. They don't hate life. They aren't necessarily depressed. They just feel disconnected from everything, including themselves. This protective mechanism is more common in people who feel deeply. Highly sensitive individuals, empathic personalities, and those who grew up managing emotional chaos are more likely to develop emotional numbness. Their brain has learned that intense feelings can be dangerous, so instead of allowing them to feel every emotion fully, it dulls their sensitivity for their own survival. In a strange way, this numbness is proof of how much they once cared and how painful that caring became. Over time, the person gets used to this muted emotional state. It becomes normal to suppress reactions, to stay calm even when everything goes wrong, to not express excitement even when something finally goes right. On the outside, they may look stable, mature, and composed, but internally, they are simply running on low power mode. It's not a choice, it's not a behavior, it's the brain's emergency shutdown routine, activated by too much hurt, too much stress, or too much emotional responsibility. And behind this numbness is a simple truth. The mind is still protecting a heart that once felt too deeply, too honestly, and too painfully for far too long. People who have become emotionally numb often master the art of appearing completely fine. They learn to wear a calm, steady mask that hides everything they no longer feel safe expressing. This mask doesn't mean they are strong or unaffected. It simply means they've survived too many moments where showing their true emotions only brought more pain, criticism, or misunderstanding. Over time, they begin to understand that the world does not always know what to do with their vulnerability. So instead of risking more hurt, they choose silence, not because they want to, but because silence has become the safest option. Behind this calm exterior is someone who has spent years practicing emotional control. They know exactly how to regulate their facial expressions, tone, and body language, so no one can guess what's happening inside. Their calmness is not natural, it is learned. It was built through experiences where their emotions were dismissed, mocked, ignored, or punished. They learned very early that the world reacts differently to emotional expression. Sometimes with coldness, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with rejection. So they decided, often unconsciously, to hide it all, to stay still, to stay quiet, to stay unreadable. This mask becomes so perfect that even the people closest to them begin to believe it. They assume the numb person is emotionally stable, mature, or unaffected by life's challenges. They might even say things like, "You're so strong," or "Nothing bothers you," but those words only deepen the numb person's isolation. Because in truth, everything bothers them. They just no longer show it. Every internal struggle is fought alone. Every emotional wound is left untreated. And every time they are praised for being calm, it reinforces the idea that their emotions are unwanted. Inside, however, the story is very different. The numb person is not calm. They are exhausted. They are not unbothered. They are overwhelmed. They are not emotionless. They are emotionally overloaded. But since they can't express what they feel, the feelings get trapped. They remain unspoken, unprocessed, and unacknowledged. This inner pressure eventually creates a sense of emotional distance, as if the person is living life from behind a glass wall. They watch themselves react the way they are supposed to, but none of it feels real. None of it feels like them anymore. This mask also prevents them from receiving help. How can anyone reach a person who looks perfectly fine? How can anyone understand the weight they carry when the mask shows only serenity? This is why emotional numbness becomes so dangerous. It hides itself behind a convincing performance of stability. People with numbness often go unnoticed, unsupported, untouched by genuine concern, simply because they look calm. Their calmness is their camouflage. The truth is, these individuals have not stopped feeling. They have stopped showing. Their pain didn't disappear. It just went into hiding. Their emotions didn't die. They just learned to silence them. And the mask they wear every day is not a symbol of strength, but a reminder of how much they have endured and how deeply they've been misunderstood. Emotional numbness is rarely a conscious decision. It is almost always the result of someone trying to protect themselves from emotional pain they could no longer endure. When a person repeatedly experiences hurt, disappointment, betrayal, or overwhelming emotional chaos, the mind slowly begins to disconnect from feelings as an act of self-preservation. It's a survival instinct. The brain learns that emotions have consequences, and those consequences have been painful enough to force it into defense mode. So instead of allowing the person to feel deeply and be hurt again, it begins shutting down emotional pathways one by one. This disconnect doesn't happen suddenly. At first, the person might feel themselves withdrawing, becoming quieter, more distant, more detached. They may start avoiding conversations that require vulnerability or situations that trigger emotional responses. They stop opening up to people who once mattered, not because they stopped caring, but because caring became risky. They may tell themselves things like it's better not to feel anything, or feelings only make things worse, and with time, this internal narrative becomes a belief system. Eventually, emotional numbness becomes the default state, a habitual reaction to anything that could cause discomfort or pain. Deep inside, these individuals often carry unhealed emotional wounds. Sometimes these wounds come from childhood environments where emotions were unsafe, unpredictable, or invalidated. Sometimes they come from adult experiences, heartbreak, loss, betrayal, stress, or long-term loneliness. When emotions repeatedly lead to suffering, the brain learns to associate feeling with danger, so instead of allowing vulnerability, it shuts down the emotional system in an attempt to protect the person from further harm. This is why people who become numb often describe it as a switch turning off, even though it happened gradually. The tragedy is that this numbness doesn't just block negative feelings, it blocks positive ones as well. The person who protects themselves from pain also loses access to joy, excitement, love, and connection. They may want to feel close to someone but find themselves unable. They may want to enjoy moments, but nothing inside responds. They may want to cry or express sadness, but the tears don't come. This emotional shutdown becomes a double-edged sword. It prevents hurt, but it also prevents healing. The disconnect also creates a sense of identity confusion. When a person no longer feels their emotions, they lose the emotional signals that guide decision-making, relationships, and self-understanding. They begin to live in a kind of autopilot mode, going through life mechanically. They may feel like they're watching their life instead of living it. This detachment can lead to isolation because emotional connection, the glue of human relationships, becomes difficult or even impossible to form. Despite all of this, emotionally numb people often crave connection more deeply than anyone else. They want someone to understand that their silence is not indifference, but a survival mechanism. They want to feel, but they don't know how to start again. Their emotional disconnect is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of how much they have endured, how deeply they once felt, and how desperately their mind is trying to protect them from ever breaking like that again. One of the most painful experiences for someone who has become emotionally numb is the way the world misreads them. People often interpret numbness as coldness, indifference, or a lack of caring. They assume that the person is distant because they don't want to connect, when in reality, the numb individual is struggling to feel anything at all. This misunderstanding makes their internal battle even heavier, because now they are not only fighting their own emotional shutdown, they are also dealing with the judgment, confusion, and expectations of others. And the more people misinterpret them, the deeper the numb person retreats into silence. In everyday interactions, numb individuals often appear calm, quiet, or unresponsive. To outsiders, this looks like emotional stability or emotional detachment. People might assume that they are too busy, too serious, or simply not interested, but behind this expressionless exterior is someone who wants connection but feels disconnected from their own emotional world. They may want to comfort someone, but they can't access the warmth inside. They may want to express love, but they can't feel the emotional spark that makes it real. This gap between intention and emotional capacity creates a painful sense of inadequacy. They feel guilty for not reacting correctly. They feel ashamed for being unable to feel what others expect them to. They feel misunderstood even when surrounded by people. The world is quick to label what it cannot understand. When a numb person doesn't react to good news, people assume they are ungrateful. When they don't react to bad news, people call them heartless. When they don't show excitement in celebrations, they're seen as boring. When they don't express sadness openly, they're seen as cold. These judgments accumulate over time, carving deeper emotional distance. The numb person begins to feel like they have to act, to fake reactions just to appear normal. But pretending becomes exhausting. The more they mask their numbness, the more disconnected they feel from themselves. This misunderstanding also damages relationships. Loved ones may feel ignored or unappreciated. Friends may think the numb person is losing interest. Partners may feel unloved. Yet none of these assumptions reflect the numb person's true intentions. They want to care, they want to respond, they want to connect. But emotional numbness steals the tools they need to do so. It makes them look like they don't care even when they care deeply. It makes them look distant even when they desperately want closeness. It makes them look unaffected even when they are silently breaking. This misinterpretation from others often pushes numb individuals further into isolation. They stop explaining themselves, because explanations require emotional language they no longer have. They stop arguing because arguments require emotional energy they cannot access. They stop correcting misunderstandings because no one seems to listen long enough to understand the truth. They are not cold, they are wounded. They are not indifferent, they are emotionally locked. They are not avoiding connection. They are unable to feel safe enough to open again. And so the numb person continues living behind a misunderstood exterior, carrying emotions they can't fully feel, surrounded by people who see everything except the pain hidden beneath their calm, expressionless surface. Emotional numbness rarely begins as a choice, but the most haunting part of it is how easily it becomes a habit. At first, the mind numbs itself to survive overwhelming pain, stress, or emotional chaos. But when this numbness continues for weeks, months, or even years, the brain begins to treat it as the new normal. What started as a temporary defense mechanism slowly turns into a way of living. The person stops noticing the numbness because it becomes woven into their daily behavior, a silent routine, an emotional autopilot. Feeling nothing stops being strange and starts becoming familiar. And once it becomes familiar, it becomes hard to escape. This emotional shutdown becomes a habit because the brain learns through repetition. If the mind repeatedly disconnects from feelings to avoid emotional pain, it becomes conditioned to do so automatically. The body begins to respond to stressful or emotional situations with numbness instead of reaction. Over time, even situations that should evoke positive emotions, excitement, joy, affection, fail to activate a response. The emotional pathways that were once alive and active grow weaker from lack of use. This is why many people who are emotionally numb struggle to describe what they feel. Their emotional vocabulary collapses. They forget what certain emotions felt like because they haven't experienced them in so long. Joy becomes foreign, sadness becomes muted, love becomes distant, and emptiness becomes the most familiar feeling of all. As this numbness becomes a habit, the person's life begins to revolve around routines and responsibilities rather than emotions. They wake up, move through the day, complete tasks, talk to people, and sleep, all without feeling emotionally connected to any of it. It's not that they don't want to feel, it's that the emotional part of their brain has gone quiet, like a radio stuck on low frequency. They go through life functioning but not living. They smile because they know they should. They respond because it's expected. They show up because it's necessary, but none of it touches them internally. Life becomes something they observe rather than experience. This habitual numbness also affects how they see themselves. They may begin to believe that they're naturally emotionless, that they're not the type to feel deeply anymore. They may assume they've become cold, even though coldness is not who they are. It's simply what their emotional shutdown trained them to be. This creates a painful internal conflict. Deep inside, they know they used to feel more. They remember a time when their emotions were alive and expressive. But now, no matter how hard they try, their emotional system doesn't respond the way they want it to. This makes them feel broken. Even though they're not, they're simply emotionally exhausted. When numbness becomes a habit, reconnecting with emotions feels terrifying. Feeling again means risking pain again. It means opening doors the mind worked so hard to close, so the person hesitates. They stay in the numbness because it feels safe, predictable, and less overwhelming. This is why emotional numbness becomes so difficult to break. It is not just a psychological state, it becomes a lifestyle shaped by self-protection. But at its core, habitual numbness is not a sign of someone who doesn't feel. It is a sign of someone who once felt too much, too deeply, and too painfully. Someone who cared so intensely that their mind had no choice but to shut down the emotional system to keep them alive. And behind that quiet, detached exterior is a human being who has not lost their emotions. They have simply forgotten how to access them after being hurt one time too many. When a person becomes emotionally numb, it isn't the absence of emotion, it's the echo of emotions that were once too heavy to carry. It's the quiet aftermath of battles no one else saw, the invisible wounds that never fully healed. Emotional numbness is not a flaw, not a weakness, and certainly not a sign that someone is incapable of love or depth. It's the mind's final line of defense when it has been pushed beyond its limits. And yet, within that silence, something important remains. The proof that this person once felt deeply enough to need protection. If you or someone you know has slipped into this state, remember this truth. Numbness is not the end of emotional life. It is a pause, a suspension, a moment of survival. The emotions you think you've lost are not gone. They are buried, dormant, waiting for safety to return. And safety comes slowly through patience, gentleness, and understanding. Healing begins not by forcing yourself to feel, but by allowing yourself to exist without judgment. By giving yourself the softness you were never offered. By rebuilding trust with your own mind, one small moment at a time. The journey out of emotional numbness is not dramatic, it's quiet, it's subtle. It's in noticing one small feeling, annoyance, warmth, gratitude, and allowing it to matter. It's in reconnecting with simple things, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of your own breathing, the presence of someone who truly sees you. With every tiny spark of emotion, the system slowly wakes up again. And one day, unexpected, unplanned, you feel something real. Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's relief, maybe it's the faintest flicker of joy. Whatever it is, it reminds you that you were never broken, you were healing in silence. Emotional numbness is not a permanent identity, it is a temporary shield built by a mind that was trying its best to protect you. And when you begin to put that shield down, you will rediscover the depth within you. The depth that never disappeared, only hid until you were strong enough to feel again.